Hello, everybody in Psych 267, Forensic Psychology. This week we do chapters 6 and 7. They're both a little shorter than some of the other chapters, so it makes more sense to do both of them in the same week. In fact, you will see that this first one, chapter 6, is only 2 pages. Or one piece of paper front and back if you have your reading packet in front of you. Ethics and how that's related to the practice of forensic psychology. That's the first thing that we're going to talk about. And again, hopefully you're keeping up with the Douglas book and those assignments too. So, chapter 6. Let's get to it. 2 pages, 1 page in your reading packet front and back. So, first of all, ethics related to the practice of forensic psychology is a little different than the ethics related to the practice of clinical psychology. They're similar, but different. Not only that, the ethics are different than other occupations, other jobs, like attorneys, for instance. This is the second paragraph. They have to represent their client, as it says here, the word zealous representation. That's the way it's described. Whatever I can do to defend my client. If it's a criminal case, there's a prosecutor, has to be a zealous prosecutor. That's not a word we use very often, is it? Zealous. But the psychologist might be in conflict with one of these sides, and usually that is the case, come to think of it, because you have to be neutral. So the attorney might coach their client on how to perform on the psychological test or how to act during the interview, but psychologists, well, we can't do that. We have to be neutral, we have to be impartial, and that is how it works. So, DeBow and Weissman, actually this article, they've written a few things together. This article from 2003, Weissman and DeBow, that is referenced right here. They talk about 12 things that psychologists need to know. These obstacles, you're in luck. You're watching this video, I'll tell you the 3 of these 12 that you should know for the exam. And they kind of go in a pretty easy order. Number 4, number 8, and number 12. So, first of all, number 4. Assuming that the attorney, or attorneys, plural, will supply what you need. That doesn't happen. I've been on court cases where the attorney's supposed to give me all the information, and wouldn't you know it, they forgot the kid's school records, which shows suspensions, or they forgot the information that the kid was arrested in another state. I mean, of course they didn't forget. They don't want me to know that for my opinion and my record review. So records are only as good as the person doing the records, but they're also only as good as the records that you get. Number 8, entering into a multiple relationship. If you're someone's therapist and then that person says to you, oh, by the way, I'm getting a divorce, can you testify for me? No is the answer, because I am not unbiased and neutral. Same thing with a criminal complaint. Hey, I just got a DUI and you've been my psychologist for a year. Can you come testify for me? No, I can't. I'm sorry. You have to refuse based on multiple relationships. You don't want to be put into that position. Now, can you write a letter saying this person has shown up to his appointments every week in a timely manner? Yes, but just don't say anything that would make you seem biased. Number 12, not using needed sources such as third-party interviews. So, here's what's happened to me in court cases. I will have a kid tell me what I think is the truth, that he gets into trouble at school a lot, and then the mom wants to defend him, or the dad. Oh, my child's so perfect, he doesn't do anything wrong. Well, who could be a third party? Wait a minute, how about the school? Call a teacher, call the principal, and anybody who's willing to talk can be very helpful. Kind of seems like they would say, nope, FERPA, I can't talk to you. But since it's a court hearing, they can. So moving right along, let's see, how about the first paragraph? Sometimes you get hired by a lawyer, retaining you. That's what we call it. Well, That's a little bit of a problem, huh? The defense attorney is paying you, and then what if you have to say something bad about his or her client? You still have to do that. Regardless of who's paying you, you have to speak the truth. That's just required. Um, Communication is important. Avoid any misunderstandings. What if you already have some kind of conflict? Like, oh, this person was a student of mine or a therapy client of mine. You have to resolve those things. Confidentiality. You see, that's the next thing here. We're almost done with this section of the reading packet. You've probably heard this, right? Psychologists have to keep things confidential unless we know that the person is going to harm themselves or someone else. Well, guess what? That all goes out the window if it is an evaluation for a court case. And you have to tell the person that in advance. Hey, what you tell me is not confidential. I have to write up a report for your lawyer or for the court or for the judge. So you have to resolve those kinds of issues. And if you have any conflict of interest, you know the person already, put it in writing. So here's what happens to me, personal story of working in these kinds of situations. Sometimes I do an evaluation and realize that I have read about this or heard about it in the news. Sometimes I already know who the person is because I live in this area. Gee, if that person, robbed a Circle K, maybe I've heard about it, or maybe my kids went to school with that person. If it's anything like that, you put it in writing so that there is no misunderstanding about what you said or who you told it to or whatever. Always put those things in writing, type it up and submit it to the court, and then you have done what you needed to do for ethics. Look, that's one of the only colorful things in this reading packet, huh? I found that on Google Images. Moving right along, civil law. This is something that you probably didn't think of when you signed up for this class, huh? Did you sign up because it seemed interesting, or because you like those CSI or true crime shows? Or maybe you want to do this for a living one day? Well, maybe you never even thought of the fact that it's not all serial killers, is it? Sometimes people go to court because they got hurt and they're suing, and there's psychological factors involved in that for sure. Psychologists are hired for a lot of these things. So, oh my goodness. Sorry about that. Didn't know I get pop-up messages on this particular computer. Civil law versus criminal law. Civil law. When people think of forensic psychology, it is easy to imagine those exciting things. Prison and serial killers and crime shows and stuff like that. But most referrals are civil in nature. They have to do with money. Somebody says, my rights were violated. This is costing me money. This is costing me time off of work and things like that. So there are many different types of civil cases. However, it's called a tort. You see that in bold here? The tort is what you file. That's the lawsuit saying, I think this person owes me something, whether it's money or a new car or you have to fix my house because you crashed into it or whatever. Just in case you speak French, tortoise, not to be confused with the green animal. Get it? It means twisted or knocked out of place. Not tortoise like the big turtle. It's different. Anyway, there's a difference here, too, between what you're called. The person who has to defend himself or herself is a defendant. That's true in criminal cases, but there's no prosecution. Instead, it's a plaintiff. A plaintiff is the one who's alleging the damages, and the defendant is the one who has to defend himself or herself. Now, have you heard about this in criminal cases? Beyond a reasonable doubt. Think of that as, I'm 99% sure that you're the one who did this. That's the reasonable doubt, maybe 1%. However, in civil cases, is there a preponderance of evidence? I would call that 51% certainty versus 49% uncertainty. So in other words, more likely than not that you damage that person's car or whatever. See how it's different? Now, this has happened quite often, and some of them have been quite famous. The person is found not guilty, like O.J. Simpson in the 1990s, because they couldn't prove beyond a reasonable doubt that it was him. But guess what? The family sues and says, you took my child away from me, and they win. How could that happen? Because it's more likely than not that you were the one who did it. And then the judge or the jury has to decide, how much money is that worth? Or does the person owe you something? Now, the types of punishments. In criminal cases, there is some criminal liability like jail time, but or being on probation or ankle monitor or whatever. Civil cases, it's almost always about money. Not always, but quite often. Now, 5 elements of a tort. You did something to me and you either owe me money or you owe me stuff or you owe me time, like that you have to work for me. It's usually money though. Anyway, the ratio of lawsuits is 1 for every 15 people in the United States. That's a lot, and that's in any given year. So in other words, 20 million of these torts are filed. Wow, 1 out of every 15 people is involved in a lawsuit that you owe me money. So, I love this example. I didn't think of it. I stole it from someone else. Creepy crawlers, exotic traveling pets. There are places like this that will come to your birthday party or your wedding or whatever and show you all these creepy things, snakes and spiders and stuff. But wait a minute. What if one of their things that they bring, animal, insect, whatever, hurts somebody? Oh my goodness. 5-year-old son's birthday party and the giant python should not be biting your kid, obviously. That sounds exciting, huh? So the first thing is, where it says first here, is it true that there's proof that the person had legal liability to protect you? Yes. I'm bringing you into my child's birthday party. You should protect my child and not let the child be injured for any reason. Second, were you derelict or negligent? In other words, you didn't do something that you should have done. For example, make sure that that python wasn't poisonous, or that the spider wasn't able to bite the kid, or maybe shouldn't have been out of the cage in the first place, that wild animal. I'm making these things up as I go. The person was negligent or derelict. Third, proximate cause. The injury or damage would not have occurred if this event didn't take place. Does that make sense? If you didn't show up to my kid's birthday party, he wouldn't have a bite mark on his arm. Hopefully that's all it is and nothing worse than that. You have to prove that one caused the other. Fourth, the extent of the injury. First of all, that there was an injury or damage, and believe it or not, it can even be psychological damage. It doesn't have to be a medical problem. The child is traumatized now. That could be it, huh? So the fourth thing, the extent of the injury. How bad is it? And then the fifth thing, is there compensation that would make up for it? An appropriate amount of money? It doesn't have to be money. Let me tell you a true story that happened to me and my family. I won't mention the name of this restaurant. We went out to eat, and that night, I don't know about you, being a guy, but I don't get cramps that often, but oh my goodness, this was so painful in the middle of the night after dinner. In the morning, I woke up to a phone call at 7 a.m., and my mom said, did anybody in your house get sick last night? Because I was throwing up and I had cramps. And I'm like, wow, yes, I had cramps, but I didn't throw up. And then I talked to my brother-in-law, my sister's husband. Same thing. Well, what did we discover? The 3 of us who got sick shared a Caesar salad, like a big bowl salad kind of thing. We all split it. So we called the restaurant and they're like, oh my goodness, I feel so bad. And the lady said, the manager just said she's throwing out the lettuce, throwing out the dressing, and even throwing out the bowls that we used last night. We are so sorry. Look, would your family like to come in and eat anything you want for dinner, including alcohol, for free on us? And we're like, yeah. just to prove that it wouldn't happen a second time. It was a fluke. That seemed like appropriate compensation to me. We had no need to sue them in court and, take their restaurant from them or anything crazy like that. What was the extent of the damage? Number 4. And number 5, fifth, is it worth money? Well, in this case, I think a free dinner was worth it. And yes, we still tipped our server, but still, that seemed appropriate to me. What is it worth? I have a nephew that was on a scooter in Hawaii and was hit by a work truck. He deserved a lot more money than just a free dinner, huh? Because that was a real medical, good thing he's recovered, but that was a real medical thing that kept him out of school for a while. So still, you have to decide, is it damage, how much damage, and is it worth money? Number 5. Make sense? So, the role of the forensic psychologist is to determine the level of psychological damage. If you ever go into this line of work like I have, don't get sucked into trying to diagnose medical problems because, well, I don't know about you, but I'm not a medical doctor. So, you have to stick to your role, psychological problems. Also, you have to, even if it's the person who's the plaintiff or the defendant hiring you, make sure you don't get sucked into another thing, which is taking their side. You have to be honest what you think the damage is. I was once hired to evaluate a woman who almost fell off of a horse, and when I was doing the evaluation, I realized she just wants money. There's nothing wrong with her. She didn't even get hurt at all. She says it's traumatizing. I don't think that's worth money. Well, even though her attorney was paying me, I had to keep in mind that it's my responsibility, see, who's paying for the service, to be honest. There's a pretty unfortunate term that there's used, the whore of the court. See right here, like prostitute, whore of the court. You don't want to have that reputation that you'll do anything for money. So therefore, stick to your ethics, like in the previous chapter. That's why we do 2 chapters here at once. So, CR 35. All you need to know is just the name of it, really. It's the rules of federal court proceedings, of how these things are filed and how they're handled, and the reports that are done by psychologists or physicians, medical doctors. Just know that it's called CR 35. I do not want you to feel like you have to go into a whole lot of detail about that. So, some expectations. Again, you don't have to try to memorize these 5 things here by Greenberg, 2003, but just kind of know what they are. The person's level of functioning prior to the accident. Did you get whacked in the head and you were super smart before and now you're completely forgetful? Well, that's very relevant. But if nothing has changed, well, you need to be honest about that when you're doing a report on somebody. Number 2, the nature and the extent of the psychological harm. Don't get into the medical stuff. You're not an expert in that if you're a psychologist. What kind of psychological impairments? Is it now post-traumatic stress disorder or something different? You have to be honest about it. The probable cause? Well, if that accident didn't happen, then this person never would have had the psychological damage. And number 5, what does the person need? Are they going to need a different kind of job training? Are they going to need medicine or counseling? Long-term implications if the person does or does not have the treatment? That's the kind of stuff that you need to say for certain. So do you see how these two, I'm getting on to the next one, aren't I? My bad. Do you see how these 2 chapters relate to each other? First, there's ethics that you have to follow, and then there's civil law, non-criminal. Those are the things that we cover this week because they're not the same topic, but they're close enough and they're short enough in duration here that it makes sense to discuss them at the same time. So make sure you're keeping up with the reading packet. You certainly need to be looking at that, the modules, the Douglas book, and that is it for this one. Take care and talk to you next time.